My understanding is that ethnic studies and social justice are very similar in the sense that they are focused on understanding systems of power, equity, inequality, culture, and the different identities people can have, including gender, race, class, religion, etc. Although they are similar, they do have slight differences. Ethnic studies is focused more on culture, experiences, history, and history of different racial groups. It specifically focuses on marginalized groups, including African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, indigenous people, and any other marginalized groups in the United States. To my understanding, the goal of ethnic studies is to understand the power systems that are against the minority groups, and it is also to understand and appreciate the importance of culture, race, and diversity. On the other hand, social justice is more about equal rights and fair treatment. It still addresses injustices related to race, color, gender, and class, but it does it through a slightly different lens. Drawing from course content, the authors defined it as a struggle against a system of power like capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. As stated in 11.1 in the 11.1 introduction reading, a major element in the discipline of ethnic studies is understanding but also appreciating also participating in liberation struggles, particularly those resisting white supremacy, capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, and patriarchy, or any intersecting powers that have suppressed communities of color. In fact, the genesis of ethnic studies as an academic discipline came out of student struggle and solidarity across racial groups, ethnic groups. The authors also said ethnic studies is important for showing that people of color have always been defiant and have fought for their freedom since the beginning. I think that's what it means to the authors. Ethnic studies is a tool used to educate our youth and show them that minority groups need to continue fighting the systems that oppress and work against us. There are many weekly topics that stood out to me, like week 14 that discuss prison abolition, week 10 that discuss model minority myths, week 11 which discuss white supremacy, week 15 which talked about racial wealth gaps. A key concept in week 14 that stood out to me is the idea of prison abolition. I actually disagreed with this at first, but I realized through Angela Davis's book, Are Prisons Obsolete?, that prisons were only made to oppress minority groups, and prison abolition focuses on reforming communities before criminals can become criminals. And in my opinion, has changed, and I'm on the side of prison abolition now. And there's an interesting video in week 15 that has many concepts that stood out to me. For example, at 6:36 in the video in week 15, the Federal Housing Administration was said to help people buy homes, but they wouldn't insure mortgages in risky areas, and risky areas were determined by race, thus creating redlining. This created low-resource neighborhoods with little to no wealth. It created a violent cycle of poverty and incarceration. At 12:23 in a week 14 video, Michelle Alexander explains how the war on drugs was exclusively waged on black and browns. She also explains how black and brown groups are no more likely than white groups to use and sell drugs. Week 10 concept stood out to me because it shows how the government pins minority groups against each other to keep us distracted from the real problem, which is corrupt systems that run the United States society. The model minority that week 10 speaks of is Asian Americans. There is a misconception that they are smart, particularly in math and sciences, are well-mannered, and wealthy. This misconception leads people to believe that if one minority group can achieve this on the level of white Americans, then why can't blacks and Hispanics do the same? Well, it's not true. For example, in an article in week 10, you are called a model minority as an Asian American until they decide you aren't. It states Asian Americans are more likely than other groups to have 3 or more workers per household. One reason why the averages seem so inflated. We often tend to live in some of the nation's most expensive cities, so when you factor in those costs, the apparent advantages in household income starts to evaporate. It made me reflect on my own experiences because my friends are Asians, and I've seen these misconceptions firsthand, but going through these modules really it gave me a name to what I was seeing, and I was very surprised because the statistics told me 50% of Asian Americans know about the model minority myth, but I've never heard about it. And having Asian friends, it really surprised me. And week 11 module introduced white supremacy and how white privilege is often looked over. It explored themes like white people not having to feel out of place because they are seen as the norm, and how white people say they aren't racist, but their actions prove they still are, like living in only white neighborhoods or putting their kids in mostly white schools. And avoiding the parts of town that are considered risky based on race. I think these all relate pretty well to our current society because these events are all fairly new. The model minority myth is still very strong. The justice system is at its peak of 2 million prisoners, with Black and Hispanics taking up the majority. Segregation in neighborhoods is still very apparent, and the racial wealth gap is bigger than ever because generations of passing down assets have compounded, and marginalized groups that didn't get that same opportunity. Some key identities that shape who I am include being Hispanic and being a first-generation low-income student, fitness, and authenticity. I can say many other things, but those are what my core identity is that everything else stems from. I value consistency, my education, authenticity, and discipline. This is who I am at my core, and yeah, I am a very hardworking person at my core, and I try to be authentic. Being a low-income first-generation college student has shaped my understanding of privilege and marginalization the most. Throughout this course, I learned that intersectionality explains how different aspects of identity connect and affect people's opportunities and experiences. Growing up low income made me realize that education is not equally accessible to everyone, even though society often says so. There are many misconceptions around tuition that scare lower income students away from higher education. I myself went to this. Mediocrity is a term I learned in this course, and it means if you work hard, you'll succeed, and that just simply isn't true. While hard work is important, systemic barriers such as unequal schools, economic inequality, and the lack of resources can make success much more difficult for certain groups. As a first-generation college student, there are many things about college, financial aid, and career planning that I've had to learn on my own. At the same time, I am privileged in ways like I'm physically healthy, I have access to education, and I can pursue my career goals. This course helped me better understand how privilege and marginalization can exist at the same time, depending on identities and life experiences. Honestly, my thoughts on ethnic studies at first was I thought it was like kind of useless. I just thought I knew everything about like my race and my culture, so I didn't really have to learn about others, but my perspective definitely has significantly changed, and I'm kind of sad this course is ending. I genuinely like doing the readings, and I like the writing about them more. I like the learning about the system of oppressions in our country, and I got introduced to so many different terms that are genuinely intriguing. And yeah, this is the type of stuff that the general public needs to know to be more well informed, so we can have more solidarity. I think the biggest takeaways is the difference between racism, prejudice, discrimination, and stereotypes. I think this can be applied to my day-to-day life because, you can discriminate someone without having any prejudice or being racist, and you can stereotype them as well, and you can have one without the other, and usually they go hand in hand, but you can have one without the other, so it's just something to be mindful of. And another key takeaway is the racial wealth gap. I've always said that, minority groups make the same amount of money, so why can't, why aren't we on the same level? But this course helped me understand that there's like a big wealth gap, and it's like it compounded over time. But I think I can apply what I've learned in the future by getting involved more in like peaceful protests and activism. Overall, this course taught me that ethnic studies is not just about learning history, it's about understanding how systems shape people's lives and how awareness can lead to change. I now see the importance of continuing conversations about inequality, culture, and justice so future generations can live in a more informed and equitable society.